Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this latest teaching session in the course on technology and the future of medicine. You know what, this course is very speculative. It's in the nature of the job of professors in a university to be speculative, but this is a very speculative course. And these two lectures this week are probably the most speculative lectures that we have in the course, so it's very exciting from that point of view. And the other thing is that, as I told you earlier, we've done peer review where we had prominent people from the outside suggest improvements. And this week you'll see that, because this is the first time ever that we've had two lectures on quantum biology. And that's because they felt we were trying to pack too much into the one lecture, and that's certainly true. If you ever watch the video, there's a tremendous amount of action in 80 minutes in those existing videos. So the breaking of this subject into two different lectures on Tuesday and Thursday is a direct effect of having done the peer review exercise. So without any further ado, Jack Tuszynski is going to take you through Quantum Biology A.
Thanks, Kim. Actually, this ending to the title is a modification from last year, and in fact is a direct result of Kim's sending of the paper last night. So we have a bit of a Canadian content to it. So quantum biology. There'll be two lectures today and on Thursday. Today, I will spend most of the time actually talking about quantum physics and leading to quantum biology. And on Thursday, we'll plunge headfirst into biological aspects. Some of it may be, as Kim said, quite speculative, but I think our role here at the university is to speculate about the future, not so much to linger in the past. However, I will start by painting a historical perspective because it's very important to ground ourselves in the history of science. And I don't know how many of you, and I'll ask this question now, how many of you have physics background of any kind? University level physics. Okay, so you have a little bit, maybe some more than others. We have a visiting professor from Brazil who is a physicist. So today you'll have to struggle with me. So I'll start with this historical content, and it goes back actually to the end of 19th century. And if I remember correctly, around 1870, there's a famous statement made by Lord Kelvin in front of the Royal Society in London saying that physics has been completed, there's no more things to be discovered, and the rest is just applications to engineering. And a mere 3 decades later, there was the greatest scientific revolution of all time taking place in physics. And the crowning achievement of this scientific revolution was this Solvay conference in Brussels. Actually, I went to Metropole Hotel where this conference took place, and it has this old European grandeur. And I could imagine being there with the luminaries of the time, the greatest minds that ever walked the surface of the earth, in my humble opinion. Almost everybody in this picture got a Nobel Prize. Marie Curie got 2, and others got 1. And you can see Paul Dirac here, and it's a little bit fuzzy. Niels Bohr, Schrödinger, Einstein, and Heisenberg, and others. These conferences in Brussels solidified the foundations of the new science of quantum physics, and it took a stormy 2 or 3 decades to reach that point because pretty much everything we knew about the nature of reality had to be re-examined in view of the discoveries of quantum physics. So we have to go back to the basics and revise what we know about matter and particles. And basically, the starting point was Newton's laws plus electromagnetism and thermodynamics. And quantum mechanics changed pretty much all of that. Although I have to say that the mathematical foundations of quantum mechanics are very different from classical mechanics. The conceptual aspects sometimes. Well, they have to be consistent because in the limit of large systems, and what it means exactly is still a bit up to debate, but in the limit of large systems, we have to end up with classical equations because otherwise we wouldn't be able to build buildings and have machinery that works. We still rely on Newtonian mechanics for most of the engineering applications. Quantum mechanics, however, launched the revolution that we witness today in telecommunications and electronics, etc. So, whereas Maxwell's equations and Newton's equations apply to microscopic systems, quantum mechanics, in principle, applies to microscopic systems. This is our starting assumption. And we push this boundary further and further as we develop applications. So where it ends, we still don't exactly know. Whether biology is the boundary, that is really very much up to debate. I'll come back to it regarding the limits a bit later, but I'm preempting some of it here by saying that there exist macroscopic quantum phenomena, and some of them actually have been known to mankind almost from the beginning, not as quantum, but as physical properties of matter. So there are several major distinctions between classical and quantum physics, and I want to highlight them now. Conceptually, you'll see one equation maybe or two, but I don't want to place too much emphasis on the formalism, but more on the understanding of what's behind it. So the first deviation from classical understanding of matter is that there is no hard objects, there is no masses seen as ping pong balls or golf balls with sharp boundaries. Pretty much all the microscopic elements of nature are wave-like, and there is this matter-wave duality. So depending on what you actually measure in the lab, different manifestations of these properties will be seen. Mass is endowed with momentum. Waves can be measured by the propagation velocity and the wavelength or frequency, and that is also a property of particles. So particles are wave-like, waves are particle-like. So light is, to us, naturally a wave, but it also behaves like a particle because it can hit massive objects and, through collisions, move them off their course. Actually, Newton had this vision of light as particles already 300 years plus ago. Another thing is that in quantum mechanics, we don't have complete knowledge of the universe ever. This is impossible. Instead of knowing precise positions and velocities of particles in classical physics, in quantum mechanics, we only have probabilities of systems, let's put it this way to avoid the word particle, systems, probability of systems being somewhere in space at some point in time or having a particular type of property. I have difficulty switching the language from the language of everyday life to quantum mechanical language. You have to be very precise, and without mathematics, it's a little bit challenging. Then the third property, which is very important and still engendering heated debates, is that of the observer. In quantum mechanics, unlike in classical mechanics, the observer is an active player in the process of measurement. There is no way of conducting a pure experiment in which you do not disturb the observed object. As I said to you just a moment ago, even a single photon will hit a particle and get it off its course. So there is no subtle way of measurement. Every way of measuring a property of a system is brutal. It really changes the state of the system, and you cannot disentangle it. And of course, the name quantum mechanics comes from quantization, and we have kind of an intuitive feel for what quantization means. That basically is a way of enumerating the amount of energy with quanta, or integer values of energy. This is a simplification. There are systems in quantum mechanics which have continuum energy levels, or discrete, partially continuum. But the first measurements that led to quantum mechanics, as I'll show you in a moment, revealed this property of energy quantization, and the name stuck with it. Basically, the black body radiation experiments explained by Max Planck. And finally, the biggest surprise of it all, I think, in quantum mechanics is the so-called Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which tells us that there are properties, not all, but there are properties such as position and momentum. Momentum is mass times velocity in classical terms. In quantum mechanics, is actually an expectation value of an operator of momentum. So you have to be a little bit specific. But in a nutshell, this principle states that you cannot precisely know the value of two complementary properties, physical properties of a system. So you cannot at the same time know where a given particle is and how fast it's moving. You can know precisely one of these things, but not both. And on the right-hand side of this inequality, you have the limit to our knowledge. So that's basically a fundamental law of physics. We cannot make it more fundamental, explain it away, it simply happens. And to explain it better, I think I'd probably need an hour of heavy-duty mathematics to go through the algebras of Hermitian operators. And that, of course, is what makes quantum mechanics so difficult to explain, because it relies on advanced mathematics, the mathematics of Hilbert spaces and Hermitian operators. States of a system, such as position or orbital momentum or any such thing, require the introduction of wave functions. Wave functions exist in Hilbert spaces, and measurements of these properties involve operators, Hermitian operators, because their eigenvalues give real numbers as answers to the questions like, what's the energy of that system? What is the orbital angular momentum? What's the linear momentum? So, position momentum, there are other quantities such as angular momentum and the angle. If there is a rotating system in quantum mechanics you want to study, such as, let's say, electrons in an atom or a molecule, you cannot simultaneously know these two values, angular momentum and angle. The same with energy and time. So if you know the energy of a system, you don't know when that happened, when the energy was, the value of energy was obtained. Okay, so these were the conceptual foundations. We'll drill a bit deeper, but I don't want this to be too dry. I want to go back in history to the turn of 19th and 20th centuries, when the dawn of quantum mechanics occurred, and Max Planck was the figure that played a prominent role in quantum mechanics, and in fact, reluctantly so. He was at that time a very senior professor, very respected professor of physics, and tried to explain observations of black body radiation. So all objects that have a finite temperature, pretty much all objects have a finite temperature, emit electromagnetic radiation. You can measure the spectrum of this radiation, that is, how much energy is allocated to each frequency, a wavelength. And these measurements at that time were done very precisely, and nobody could explain why the particular function was used to explain the measured profiles. And Max Planck came up with this idea of energy of electromagnetic radiation being quantized, so coming in wave packets of definite value, not continuum of energies, but integer values of, and here comes the formula that he proposed, h times the frequency. H is the Planck constant as we now know it. It's a fundamental constant that cannot be, again, derived from anything else. It simply was obtained as a result of his efforts to explain what's out there in nature, in outer space, and here. And the Planck constant times the frequency, again, related something which is wave-like to something which is particle-like. Energy, we think typically of energy as an attribute of particles, frequency something of waves. He combined it, and furthermore, he said that energies of emitted radiation can only come in integer values of this quantum, hf, or frequency times the Planck constant. And this introduction of the integer multiple, that is 1 packet, 2 packets, 3 packets, 4, but you cannot have 2.5. It's forbidden. Was the beginning of quantum mechanics. And probably now you understand why it's called quantum, because it is really quantized in these packets. This works, and 1918 Nobel Prize followed. Planck was a reluctant convert to quantum mechanics because he did not intuitively see where it was coming from, but and many of these initial developers of quantum mechanics had, of course, internal reluctance to these crazy revolutionary ideas at the time. But many Nobel Prizes followed, and of course, it's a very reassuring award to anybody. This is Planck's radiation law formula for the density of electromagnetic spectrum, and the Planck constant is stated there, if you want. And at the bottom, you have the famous formula. Energy is Planck constant times the frequency. In this particular case, it's noted nu. So that was the first building block in terms of creating a new field of physics, and many more followed. The next one was Albert Einstein's explanation of another intriguing effect, the photoelectric effect, shining light on the surface of a metal under some conditions caused a current to flow. That was really intriguing. And the current was observed to flow only when the frequency of light was higher than a particular value, critical value. It didn't depend on the intensity of light, but on the frequency. That is, not how many photons you were able to shine on the surface, but whether they were high energy enough or not. And Einstein explained this by assuming, again, a quantum energy difference between the valence level of electrons and the conduction. So electrons have to jump to a high level, high enough to start conducting on the surface, flowing like a sea. But if the energy is insufficient for them to jump all the way, there will be no current. So that's basically a hand-waving explanation that, again, led to Einstein's Nobel Prize. His many contributions to physics should have been rewarded with maybe 5 or 6 Nobel Prizes. He got only one, and only for this, which probably is the least dramatic of all the achievements he made. I want to pause here because, in this course on the future of medicine, and within the Faculty of Medicine, I guess, we don't talk about Einstein sufficiently frequently. I think he's a figure that defies all principles of logic, and especially now in the beginning of 21st century, where science has been organized so in a military style, I would say. Everything is regimented and follows the rules of refereed publications, impact factors, numbers of citations, and we are being measured left and right and up and down. And basically, it's a cookie cutter machinery that, in my opinion, maybe you can stop filming this, but in my opinion, it actually stifles creativity. So back to Einstein. When Einstein came up with 5 papers in 1 year that changed the face of science, not just physics, for the next century, he held no faculty position. He was not eligible for any funding. He had no track record, barely passed his PhD exam, and he could barely get employment. The position he had at the patent office was only because his friend's father decided to award him this part-time position in the Bern Swiss patent office. So a person like Einstein today could not even apply for grants, let alone be given some. I just want to say that, and that's on the record. Okay, there are some other experiments. We have no time to go through it all, and some of it requires a little bit of physical background. They were mounting. Of course, atomic absorption emission spectra were also instrumental because atoms like hydrogen and helium, as we now know, are composed of the nuclei and electrons circling around, using classical language, the nuclei sticking to very well-defined orbits. Each orbit defines a state, a quantum state, and these orbits are separated by gaps. So if you want to have an electron transition from one orbit to another, or even to ionize an atom and eject the electron from the atom, you have to have sufficient energies, actually specific numbers of, specific values of energies, so that's quantization again. And this was observed and explained by Niels Bohr, who proposed the quantum theory of the atom, which is sometimes compared to Copernican picture of the solar system, where you have planets on orbits and the sun in the middle. But it's very different, of course. It's just a metaphor. There was also a double-slit experiment, which is very interesting because this demonstrates directly that particles behave like waves. You shine a beam of electrons or protons going through a double slit, and you would think that electrons or protons are particle-like or ping-pong ball-like, and they will choose one slit or the other. But when you do the measurements are consistent with the assumption that they travel through both slits. A single electron, as a wave, can separate itself from itself and go through both slits at the same time, and then reform at the screen, showing you typical interference patterns as if it was a wave. So these are mind-boggling experiments. If you think about it, that's the beginning of 20th century, so more than 100 years ago, and scientists were grappling with these concepts and solved that successfully. And another one of these major experiments is the demonstration that electrons and protons have spin, a new quantity nobody before knew it existed. It's a property of objects that respond to magnetic fields. And so spin was coined. Wolfgang Pauli explained it theoretically, got a Nobel Prize like everybody else on that list. And actually, there's something deeper. I want to spend 30 seconds maybe talking about spin and magnetism because, as you know, magnetism and magnets have been known to man almost from the beginning of time. At least we know that ancient Egyptians and Greeks were familiar with magnets. But magnetism is a quantum phenomenon, and it's proven precisely that magnetism cannot be a classical response of a system to changes of electric fields or other disturbances. So it's called the Van Loven theorem, also comes from the same era. In other words, it's a macroscopic phenomenon observed by all. You play with magnets in kindergarten, I'm sure, or elementary school, but it is a manifestly quantum effect. Without spin, there is no magnetism. So a property that was discovered only in early 20th century is behind something that we are all familiar with, but is an inherently quantum property. So when people say, and I want to come back and take issue with this paper, this article that Kim sent to us all, rather poo-pooing the whole concept of quantum biology, I think it's a very short-sighted approach, and I would say ahistorical. Okay, we'll go through, maybe I'll accelerate a bit because I'm spending a lot of time chatting and not so much about giving you the science that you need. The first postulate of quantum mechanics basically talks about what I mentioned already, that in quantum mechanics, quantum objects do not have positions and momenta per se. They are represented by wave functions. So you think about all of these as waves, and these waves can be represented mathematically by something called the wave function psi, or state function. And different systems can be in different state functions that are physically realizable. And what's important is that this is still a little bit under debate, how you interpret all of this. You know, of course, you can come up with nice pictures and words and explanations, but eventually you have to come up with something that confronts reality. So the wave function, when you square it, that's called the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. It really gives you the probability that a particle is in a given space point at a point in time with a given physical property that the wave function manifests. So square of the wave function is the probability distribution. Now, this is more difficult. You have to rewrite the whole of physics into something else. So from Newton's laws, you have to come up to something else. And the first, as I told, the first replacement is to come up with the wave function. The second is to replace physical properties of systems, such as the energy, the linear momentum, the angular momentum, etc., with quantum mechanical operators. And they are Hermitian special types of operators. I've given you here three most important ones, and then you can build on it. We all know that we solve Newton's equations, or if you want to use Lagrangian formalism in classical mechanics, you solve Euler-Lagrange equations, which is equivalent. In quantum mechanics, a new equation had to be invented that operates on the wave function with these operators. And so it's to the great credit of Erwin Schrödinger, who actually postulated this equation. And so far, well, it has not been put in doubt. Maybe it's a separate lecture to explain how he got it, but it's by similarity to the known classical equations. It took him 2 weeks, and he was on vacation in Switzerland, again, against the paradigm of modern science. No, you don't have to be at your desk. You don't have to stay there from 9 to 5, 5 days a week, 12 months a year. You can go on vacation to Switzerland, ski in the morning, and then come up with this equation, and everybody's happy. So that's the Schrödinger equation, which is basically describing the time evolution of the wave function. So you think about the probability cloud, how the cloud of probabilities for a given system evolves over time. It's a bit like weather forecasting. So you have to have initial conditions, the map of Alberta today with all the temperatures and the wind directions and cloud coverage, and then you evolve it and see how it moves tomorrow. So you solve these equations, and you predict the temperature tomorrow, -10, by the way, I think, and so on. And your confidence in the future grows dim because the probabilities get smaller, and it's similar here. Your prediction is just based on probabilities, and they spread out or diffuse. Okay, so this is the introduction. This is all I have to say on the sort of mathematical fundamental level about quantum mechanics. I hope you gain some intuitive feel for it at least. And then the next, I would say, 50 years or so in the development of quantum applications gradually shifted the focus into the outer reaches of quantum mechanics, either in terms of, let's say, velocities of propagating particles. So you reach the speed of light, and then the Schrödinger equation doesn't work anymore. You have to introduce other equations to incorporate the theory of relativity, Einstein's theory of relativity, with quantum mechanics. You have to keep in mind that these things are separate. The theory of relativity applies both to classical and quantum objects. Quantum mechanics, microscopic only. And you fuse the two, you have relativistic quantum mechanics. And the equation that is relevant to it is called the Dirac equation. Another Nobel Prize winner from that era, Paul Adrian Dirac. Other applications involved not just different velocities and regimes, but also sizes of objects. So crystals, or solids in general, were the subject of intense investigations in the 40s and 50s of the previous century. And both Einstein and others tried to develop quantum theories of solids and involved the quantization principle. Actually, this is the only example known to me of Einstein making a mistake. Not by mathematical manipulations, but conceptually. He assumed that the solid, which as you may imagine, solid is a bunch of atoms or molecules connected by bonds. he assumed them to be independent, vibrating around their equilibrium positions independently. That was Einstein's assumption. It was incorrect. And Paul Debye, around 1930, corrected it and assumed that they're actual waves, just like ocean waves, moving through the solid. These are called phonons, or, well, acoustic and optical waves in the solid. But whether you assume, like Einstein, that oscillations are independent or connected, you have to invoke the quantization principle of Planck. And I'm saying this because you can only see, or mainly see quantum behavior of solids through indirect measurements, not like particles hitting one with another and seeing collisions. For solids, you measure the response to stimuli. For example, specific heat of solids. That means you heat them up and so apply heat to a solid, and you measure how much heat is needed to increase their temperature by 1 degree. And that is a very precise measurement that allowed the development of the quantum theory of solids. This is how specific heat of solids changes at low temperatures with the absolute temperature to the power 3. At high temperatures, assumes a plateau, constant value. It's called the Dulong-Petit law. And Einstein explained the second part, but not the first one. Paul Debye explained both, and he got a Nobel Prize. Why is this important? Because when we talk about quantum biology, we are kind of obsessed with these, exotic phenomena, entanglement and action at a distance and all of this, which may be true, but it's very hard to demonstrate. Things like this, specific heats of solids, in the case of biological systems, may be much easier. And I'll show you, maybe not today, but on Thursday for sure, how you can use this kind of reasoning to explain quantum nature of metabolism, which is actually, in my opinion, the crucial property of biological systems. Without metabolism, nothing is alive, all right? So, yeah, very briefly, Einstein, as I said, assumed independent vibrations, and he got the high temperature constant R and low temperature exponential dependence, which is incorrect. And however, it's not so bad because it explains the specific heat of gases, molecular gases. You can use Einstein's formula very well. That actually is quite interesting because gases composed of molecules, low density, these molecules have independent freedom, right? But you can measure their specific heats precisely as well, and gases contain both classical degrees of freedom and quantum. In particular, rotational and vibrational motions of diatomic or larger molecules of gases are quantized. So again, another conceptual example where classical and quantum concepts can coexist. And I think in biology, definitely they do, and we don't have to juxtapose one against the other and say, oh yeah, biology is all classical. No, biology is all quantum. No, it's both. It depends on the question you're asking. Some manifestations of biological systems will be purely thermodynamic, some will be purely mechanical, but some will be quantum mechanical. And I'll try to demonstrate to you for the rest of the class today and tomorrow and on Thursday that that there are some truly quantum behaviors in biological systems. So before I move on to biology, just to close this, I promised you that there are some macroscopic, means large systems that may have quantum coherence or quantum wave function for the entire system. And these are at least 5 examples that came to my mind this morning. There may be more I may be missing, and I don't want to get into something very arcane, but these are very well studied. Superconductivity, with a history of discovery of superconductivity in different systems going back to, I think, 1917, Kamerlingh, Onnes, and Leiden, all the way to 1986, high temperature superconductivity in Zurich, all Nobel Prizes in the meantime as well. Superfluidity, admittedly exotic effects, but macroscopic. You have fluids with no viscosity. You have conductors with no resistance. Laser action, we use it daily with pointers, with scanners. It's a quantum effect, macroscopic. It's also non-equilibrium. You have to pump it with energy and stimulate the emission of radiation. And biological systems exactly operate on this type of principle. You have to provide energy and create what we call a metastable state. A ground state is the lowest energy state. Then you have higher energy states, either excited, or you can call them thermodynamically metastable. I mentioned to you crystal vibrations of phonons, macroscopic, all crystals. The question is, at what point do vibrations become classical? In other words, there is no distinction between neighboring states up to our measurement precision. So at some temperature, it becomes purely classical. And that temperature is called the Debye temperature. And there's a formula for it. I don't have it, but if anybody's interested, I can show you. And it depends on the solid. It could be very high. It could be hundreds of degrees. Could be very low. Depends on the number of atoms, the distances between them, and so on. And finally, magnetism. I told you already about it. These are all really common things, except for the first two. So when somebody says, no, biological systems are too big, they're too warm, too heterogeneous, well, think again. And this is a list of what's currently being discussed. I'll go into detail with some of this, not all, as manifestations of quantum effects in biology. If you read the literature, this has been known for a long time. The first one, light detection by the human eye, receptors in the retina, rods and cones, can detect a single photon, maybe two, but it's a threshold effect where a single quantum of electromagnetic radiation can be detected, amplified, and perceived by the brain. To me, actually, the most pertinent question is, what is the mechanism of amplification of the signal in the human body? That's the big mystery, not that it's quantum or not. It surely is quantum, but how can we have such a sensitive biological material, and how this sensitive material can amplify the signal so we perceive light to within a single quantum? The second is somewhat debatable, but I think it's gaining acceptance in the scientific community. Olfaction, sense of smell. We can recognize individual molecules, some pungent gases, for example, and it's not shape recognition, but it's resonant frequencies. So it's a quantum tunneling effect. And there's literature on this. I can point you to it if you're interested. Bird navigation, another incredibly interesting effect. Birds navigate, find their migratory pathways, and the magnetic fields that they can recognize are tiny. This challenges modern technology, how accurate the birds are in terms of recognizing field deviation, magnetic field deviations, and it can be only explained by quantum effects, magnetic Zeeman effect, basically. And again, there are some high-profile papers on this. Photosynthesis has been recently demonstrated experimentally and theoretically to be a quantum effect, quantum absorption of electromagnetic radiation and transmission of excitons through funneling to a center. I forget what it's called. One molecular complex which aggregates this energy. I'll make a case for mitochondrial metabolism being a quantum effect along the lines of specific heat of solids. And of course, last but not least, probably all of you are interested in this, consciousness with a question mark. Lots and lots of debate about this, many conferences and many heated debates, almost violent debates about this. I think it only testifies to the robustness of it as a scientific topic. So let's go deeper a little bit now. How we merge the two things: biology, quantum physics. We have Schrödinger and Darwin on the two ends of the top panel. So on the one hand, you have all these weird phenomena: superposition of states, delocalization, action at a distance, which are counterintuitive, no doubt about it. But on the other hand, biological systems, us, our brain, are incredibly mysterious to some degree because they perform such fantastic functions with such precision. I'll spend some time discussing neuroscience and the brain later on, in particular, because this is where much of the mystery lies, I think. The human brain, how it works, it's definitely a challenge to explain. So quantum mechanics offers a lot of ways out with some of these seeming paradoxes and challenges. It offers some incredibly efficient ways of information processing and computational algorithms. See, because in classical mechanics, or a classical world, if you do a computation, you have to inspect every single state and put a check mark and then do long additions. In quantum mechanics, you can, by the wave function spreading, you can visit all states at once. You can imagine how powerful this parallel processing is. So just think about this as a metaphor for the efficiency of quantum processes. And things like evolution, of course, Darwinian evolution has been going on for, about 2 billion years, 2.5 billion years, and with parallel experiments taking place all the time. So there's a huge redundancy of experiments, and it can exploit a lot of possibilities. But I'll show you some staggering numbers in a minute to really put some of this hand-waving aside as nonsensical. You have to have something better than just classical inspection of the whole set of possibilities and choosing the best one. Maybe this will work, maybe this will not. So using quantum algorithms is definitely a speed up. If you go to Wikipedia, the best source of information, I'm joking, but if you have no time, obviously, this is the best source for people with no time on their hands. Quantum biology is defined as applications of quantum mechanics to biological objects and problems, obviously. But it specifies non-trivial applications, because I forgot to mention that chemistry, in the process of expansion of quantum physics, was absorbed by physics. And quantum chemistry is the paradigm that has been accepted, and pretty much all chemical bonds and chemical reactions can be viewed in terms of quantum interactions. There is really no better way of doing it. Molecules are represented by wave functions, and electronic degrees of freedom play critical roles in bond making. So that's the trivial part. Quantum chemistry is trivial. What's non-trivial is these four specific features of quantum systems. Superposition, so that means that the particle may be in two states at the same time. This famous Schrödinger cat, I don't know there is a thought experiment, right? That if you construct a cage in which there is a cat and it's connected to a quantum detection device, and this detection device is connected to a revolver, if a particle of light strikes it, then the cat will be dead, and if it doesn't, it's alive. And you don't open this as an observer. You don't know if the cat is dead or alive. It may be both dead and alive at the same time. But in principle, it allows you to have these crazy situations where a system can be in two states at the same time. It's not just a metaphor. It is true. Non-locality, a particle can be here and somewhere else. And entanglement, that is, two particles can be in some sort of quantum relationship, being really remote to each other. Let's say one particle on a distant star and another here. If they started from the same location and they were prepared properly, let's say, have a net zero spin state, they will stay this way. And if you measure the spin state of one, you'll determine the state, the spin state of the other automatically, even though this other particle may be on a distant star. Some of these paradoxes maybe require a bit more time to explain, but they're definitely demonstrated experimentally. There is no doubt about that. And probably the most spooky is tunneling. That is, classical particles, let's say if you're trying to throw a tennis ball over a fence, and if you don't have enough strength in your arm, this tennis ball will keep coming back to the court, right? So this is a classical, you have an obstacle, and to overcome this obstacle, you need high enough kinetic energy. In quantum mechanics, this doesn't exist. Particles can tunnel, even though they may have lower energy, they can go through walls and penetrate on the other side through the wave function. So that's, I don't know how to say it, but I'm sure it's shocking to some of you who have never had quantum mechanics, but for people working in quantum mechanics, it's just a way, for example, you utilize this information to construct transistors and diodes, so it's all in electronic devices, this tunneling aspect. So can this be used in biology? So this is a long list of objections. I guess we have really not too much time to go through it all, but I'll just say that the main objections to using quantum mechanics in biology are the following. Number one, as I mentioned many times before, biological systems are really large compared to elementary particles. Even a bacterium is quite large. Number two, they require, by and large, room temperature to exist. So by physical standards, these are high temperatures. And temperature is the enemy of coherence. If you want something to behave in unison, coherently, heat introduces randomness. Thermal fluctuations destroy this coherence. So that has been actually a holy grail of all the critics of quantum biology. But there are some ways around it. And finally, living systems require an aqueous environment. So water is also an enemy of coherence, although biological water is not your water from the faucet. So we have to be very careful here. Water in living systems is organized. It's not three-dimensional water, it's not flowing water, it's two-dimensional water. And I can only refer you to the incredible work of Jerry Pollack from the University of Washington. And he wrote many books, and there are some fantastic YouTube videos. So look up Gerald Pollack, P-O-L-L-A-C-K, you'll be amazed. So enough said. The water argument, I don't buy it. The temperature argument, I think we can overcome because we know from crystals and magnets that this can be a red herring. And the real difficult argument actually is heterogeneity. Biological systems are very heterogeneous. It's not a repetition of the same atoms in the crystal lattice. You have different proteins, different membranes, biomolecules, DNA, RNA, all of this for a reason. And this is where we probably need another century to explain all of it from this perspective. But as it says at the bottom, Mother Nature is a nanotech master. It has had many years, billions of years, to experiment with on many examples. And if we discovered quantum mechanics after a mere 250 years of science following Newton, I mean, we have to really have a lot of hubris to believe that Mother Nature has not discovered. We are so much superior to the rest of nature that we have the monopoly on quantum. So quantum biology has been actually talked about almost from the beginning of quantum mechanics as a ground for exploration. And many well-known physicists stated that quantum mechanics is actually essential to understand life in general. So Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, Erwin Schrödinger, John von Neumann, Carl von Weizsäcker, Elsasser, Weizsäcker, Wigner, Dyson, and others talked about it. In particular, Schrödinger, he wrote a book called What is Life, which actually launched what we now call biophysics in 1945 or 44, if I remember correctly. And that book is still relevant today because it talks about the challenges of understanding living systems from a physical point of view. In particular, entropy reduction, which goes against the second law of thermodynamics, but other things as well. So this is another long list of different attempts at explaining various effects, biological effects using quantum physics, quantum genetics, going back to Löfven, Per Olof Löfven, 1965, and of course, the whole massive literature on consciousness, starting with Roger Penrose's 1995 book, The Shadows of the Mind, opening up the Pandora's box of paradoxes that plague the artificial intelligence community. If you try to explain the human brain and how the mind works, you end up with a lot of problems that algorithmic thinking does not really solve. So Penrose found as a possible explanation of the mysteries of mind, quantum properties, and then with Hameroff tried to develop a molecular theory of consciousness based on this. And again, photosynthesis, protein folding, there's a lot of unsolved problems in biology that at least can be better understood using quantum algorithms. Genetic code, this paper that Kim sent last night deals with the work of John Joe McFadden, and he actually contributed to the explanation of genetic searches using quantum physics. So genetics, trying to find beneficial mutations through astronomical numbers of possibilities, normally would even for the billions of years of life on Earth, would be too short. And if you use quantum reasoning, that can be accomplished in real time. And of course, I can be accused of just being another hardcore physicist, I guess, who reduces everything to atoms and molecules. Reductionism has not served science too well. Of course, we're moving away from it. It's high time. But we do have to respect the fact that biological systems are nothing but a bunch of matter. It's not so much about the structures, because structures, when they die, they return to an inanimate form, and they satisfy all the laws of physics. But when they are alive, this is the problem. The problem is not with the structure, but with the function, how they function so efficiently. And again, as advertisement for my lecture on Thursday, the human brain, I'll show you some numbers which are astounding in terms of the information processing of the human brain, the memory storage, and the energy consumption, which is minuscule compared to your laptops and supercomputers. So this is what I'm talking about. I really need to give you a number and a concept to think about. When people say, yes, but Mother Nature had 2 billion years to experiment, so classical algorithms are good enough, and that number will actually open up some problems and open your eyes, I hope. This is called an immense number. And this mathematician Elsasser came up with this. It's 10 to the power 110. And I'll explain what it means. It's a real computational barrier to us, and will remain so if you stuck within the classical paradigm. Why is that? Suppose that the entire universe is one giant computer. And every hydrogen atom in the universe, or a larger atom, is one logical element, can contain one bit of information. Okay? So you turn the mass of the universe in hydrogen atoms into a number, and I think that's 10 to the 80th, if I remember correctly. And then the age of the universe is about 17 billion years, and you assume that these atoms, hydrogen atoms, can change states, the bits, 0 to 1, on a very fast time scale, let's say 1 picosecond, 10 to the minus 12th. So that'll be 10 to the 30th individual switches, switch operations, I should say, times 10 to the 80th elements that do it, for a total of 10 to the power 110. Why is this important? It's important because if the entire universe was a one giant supercomputer operating for the entire age of the universe, from the Big Bang until now, it could only inspect 10 to the 110 objects at most. So that's the absolute limit, right? We cannot beat that. If we turn the entire universe into a big computer operating for all the age of the universe, that's the number that will come out as the number of possible operations. Do you think this is big? Yes, it is big, but it's not uncommonly big, because every area of human intellectual endeavor operates on states with that many numbers or more. For example, if you take an average protein, it might have 500, 600 amino acids, right? There are 20 amino acids available in each position. So you have 20 to the power 500 possibilities for a protein with 500, a sequence of 500 amino acids. This is way, way bigger than the immense number. In other words, we will never, ever, ever inspect, let alone understand, the space of proteins. The same with DNA, the genetic code. We have 30,000 genes for the human being, and you have, for each gene, you may have how many? I don't know. Could be 100, maybe more, 1,000. Yeah, thousands of base pairs. So you have millions, if not billions. I don't remember. There's junk DNA, of course. We think there's nothing in it, but maybe there is something in it. Even if you remove the junk, we're talking about 4 to the power many millions of possibilities just to encode genetic information. So this is beyond immense. And so on and so forth. So that's why these fields, biochemistry, chemistry, and the argument goes on actually also within physics, that every field has developed its own language, its own elements, and its own vocabulary, because it operates within an immense set. And you have to come up with shortcuts, intuitive shortcuts or empirical shortcuts, to understand each field. And therefore, you cannot make a very clean construction of human knowledge from elementary particles, particle physics to atomic physics, to condensed matter physics, to quantum chemistry, to biochemistry, to cell biology, to physiology, to health and medicine, to society, to the universe, cosmology. You know, it would be nice, but it's simply impossible. So each of these manifolds, areas of science, at best, informs the next level of knowledge about one or two elements. For example, condensed matter physics, crystals and magnets. Really, you need to know only about electrons and protons. Everything else is insignificant. You can explain all of this by fudge factors, let's put it this way. So this is from manifolds. We also switch between different levels of understanding. And at the atomic level, of course, quantum physics, as I tried to explain today, makes eminent sense. There's really nothing that can do a better job today. At the level of molecules, we have quantum chemistry, so that's still relevant. At the level of biomolecules, where we have thousands of atoms, it's a fuzzy area where we know that there are some quantum levels of interaction. Enzymatic reactions quite often require quantum description of the receptors and the reactions. And beyond that, we're talking about molecular systems and cells where we operate in the no man's land. Whatever works, works. It's very empirical. Just to tell you that pretty much anybody here who's done any biochemistry or cell biology work will be familiar with these energy scales. The scales of chemical reactions, covalent bonds, hydrogen bonds, sulfide bridges, van der Waals interactions. And all of this is really within quantum domain of energies. And if you don't want to talk about energy, you switch to the KD, the reaction rates, and you have correspondence. But what I want to say is the following, that the only thing in biology that kind of one has to keep in mind is that thermal vibrations, thermal energy, KT, is your cutoff. Below KT, if something has lower energy than KT, then it's noise and you don't care about it. And that's in red, you can't read it, but it says biological energy quantum, KT, 10 to the minus 20th. If you want to remember one number from today's lecture, 10 to the minus 20th joule. It's the lowest energy, the ground energy in biology. There is a paper about this, actually. You can look it up, biological energy quantum. Why do we need quantum mechanics in biology? Well, there are so many unsolved problems. And on Thursday, I'll try to give you some flavor for solving these problems in quantum concepts. So life itself is a metastable state. It requires constant influx of energy. It's a little bit like laser action, a switch from lamp to laser. That means coherence. We have a unitary sense of self. Although we have hands and arms and eyelids and ears, all the organs are semi-autonomous, we have a sense of togetherness, wholeness, right? So how does this arise? Where does it come from? Where is this? And I think quantum systems have that inherent wholeness in them. So we have local orders and global orders, structural and dynamical hierarchies, complexities. One aspect which is very important in quantum theory of solids is long-range order. Like in superconductivity and superfluidity, order or arrangement of local neighbors persists over macroscopic distances. So quantum physics has potential to explain long-range order, such as the feeling of coldness in your toe, and you feel it in your brain. How would that be? Can you see this as a bunch of dominoes, flipping individually over the entire length of the pathway? Summarizing or recapitulating some of what I said in terms of using quantum concepts, decoherence, entanglement, quantum computation in various applications, photosynthesis, origins of life, evolution, proteins, tunneling, and enzymes. I think one of the most interesting and underappreciated aspects is molecular recognition. How molecules in a cell, crowded environment, find their partners in biochemical reactions. To me, this is still a very puzzling phenomenon because it should take forever by diffusion to find randomly partners in an enzymatic reaction. Yet, things happen really fast and really precisely. That can be explained by quantum search algorithms and the involvement of electromagnetic interactions, rather than just physical touching of molecules in proper places. One of the giants of 20th century physics, Herbert Froelich, came up with this idea of long-range order, biological order, by assuming that dipolar vibrations at the level of membranes and cells participate in this pattern recognition between cells and biomolecules. He was one of the discoverers of superconductivity, and then later in life turned to biology and contributed immensely. Some of these ideas are still in search of experimental verification, but I think they are very interesting and talk about coherent oscillations at the level of membranes, DNA, and proteins. Time permitting, I'll also say a few words about embryology and morphogenesis. Actually, embryology is probably the most enigmatic of all sciences, life sciences. We really know so very little about it. And how an organism from a single stem cell develops into precisely differentiated groups of cells and tissues and organs, finding their place and function in the right time and point in space is a mystery. And there is early work going back to early 20th century on morphogenetic fields, fields a bit like quantum fields, which actually guide in the development of an organism. This is credited to Alexander Gurevich in Russia, and still largely unexplained. In the 70s and 80s, actually, some of this was picked up by Ilya Prigozhin in Brussels, and pattern formation was a very interesting field based on the use of nonlinear differential equations, spatial-temporal ones, and the formation of patterns out of chemical interactions, so reaction diffusion systems. So we only have some basic concepts, but no real hardcore applications. So I'm going to switch gears because my thinking about it actually goes back to a single cell. You know, we will end up probably with the whole brain, but the marvel of biology starts with a single cell. And again, I encourage you to look up this gentleman's work, Günther Albrecht Bühler from Northwestern University in Chicago, and his website called The Intelligent Cell, Cell Intelligence. Basically, he talks about a single cell being a blueprint for the whole organism, where the membrane is like our skin, where the mitochondria are like the power plant, basically, energy production. The centriole is the cell's brain and eye. And it's almost invisible. It's right in the middle. It's an organelle composed of microtubules. And he spends a lot of time there explaining how the centriole is able to perceive the environment, orient the cell, send signals, and cause cell motility. Then, of course, you have the cytoskeleton, which is like our musculature and the skeleton of the human body. It's a very powerful metaphor, but there's more to it. He's done experiments in which he demonstrated that cells perceive other cells through electromagnetic radiation, not chemical signals, not physical touching, contact, but at a distance they perceive other cells through absorption of electromagnetic radiation in the near-infrared region. This is a springboard for looking for quantum effects inside the cell, because first of all, the question is, where is the signal coming from, if it's true? And secondly, how is it registered, reported, and then amplified and sent to perform work leading to movement of the cell? You'll find probably about 200 pages and lots of video information on that website addressing these issues. Very briefly, I'll tell you the answer to the two crucial questions may be the following. A living cell, eukaryotic cell, requires energy for life, which is coming from mitochondria. Hydrogen or proton transport through mitochondria is related to emission of electromagnetic radiation. Every single event releases one photon. These photons can be captured by neighboring cells. In other words, almost like an antenna, sending signals, I'm here. A neighboring cell will capture this electromagnetic radiation by the centriole. And that's the thesis demonstrated here by experimentally. Where exactly in the centriole? It's not known. But the architecture of the centriole suggests it's a highly precise optical measurement device that allows to determine the direction from which the signal is coming to within 3 degrees, in both in plane and out of plane. The architecture of a centriole, it's 2 perpendicular barrels composed of 9 triplets of microtubules and a central axoneme, a doublet of microtubules. And these triplets of microtubules actually are movable, and they allow, it's like Venetian blinds, and they can allow the ray of light to come in, and this will be transmitted and information passed on. So remember, centrioles receive electromagnetic radiation. Quantum levels, we're talking about 2 or 3 eV. Mitochondria emit radiation. These are the key aspects. So my energy transduction, energy production, energy transduction is crucial to life. And not today, but on Thursday, I'll continue with this story, and I'll tell you that this is a quantum phenomenon. And it shows you that it's not limited to animals, mitochondria and eukaryotic cells. But in plants, you have chloroplasts, so they can, in some bacteria as well, they can directly absorb electromagnetic radiation from sunlight. And both of these effects, having to do with energy, are of quantum origin. So I think I'll stop today at this point. I hope I've given you some sort of a landscape in which to operate, and I thank you for your attention.
I just have a quick question. When you said Einstein showed like individual vibrations of the
Yes.
particles, if they vibrate in the same like sequence, doesn't that make a wave in a sense?
This is a technical argument. Let me put it this way. It's about counting the number of modes. If you have individual vibrations, so you simply repeat the same calculation over again for a single molecule, right?
Yeah.
No difference, this one or that one, they vibrate the same way. But if you put them together, it's one of those things that are called emergent phenomena. If you put these molecules into a lattice, they are bound together and there's interaction between them. So now it depends on how strongly they are bound together and how the signal is being, the vibration is being transmitted, how fast and how rigid it is. Also, it's three-dimensional, so it can go in various directions. In the end, if you count the modes, it's a different number of possibilities. If you put them together in a cube,
Yeah.
or rectangular or line, it now suddenly becomes dependent on the dimensionality as well. It's 1D, 2D, 3D, or fractal, in fact. But Einstein's approximation is zero-dimensional. It's one point, right? And suddenly put this in 1, 2, 3 dimensions, and you can go beyond. So that was the missing link. You have waves propagating, and he didn't have any. Not to put down Einstein, I mean, he's my hero.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering, so for the mitochondria is emitting electromagnetic radiation, is that due to a specific process that happens, so either like the proton pump or the ATP?
Exactly, proton pumps, yes.
Photon.
Proton pumps emit as the proton is traversing the electric field gradient. So it's a bit like, actually very similar to atomic transition. I talked to you about atomic physics. You have emission and absorption spectra, right? Electrons going from one orbit to the higher orbit require a kick in the pants, so to speak, energy injection. And when they go down, they emit photon. The same with the proton. You know, the proton in the proton pump crosses from one potential energy level to another, and then as it goes down, it emits the difference in energy in terms of a photon. So it's conservation of energy. I actually wrote a paper on this, explaining in detail how what the frequency is. It's very close to the observed frequencies in Albert Buller's experiment. It's about 1,000 nanometer wavelength.
So on the receiving end, I guess the frequency matches the central.
Yes, exactly. By the way, I was at the conference in California at Google, and one of the members of the audience, Elizabeth Reaper, as it turned out, she was a graduate student at Oxford, asked me a question, which was so hard, it took me 6 months to answer. And we published the paper together.
Okay, so what about this relationship between quantum mechanics and consciousness?
There are several places where quantum mechanics, biology, and consciousness can meet in the brain. One of which is information. Maybe this is too trivial. For many, it is when I say information processing. It's only part of our brain's activities, information storage and processing, right? So memory. The other is the action of anesthetics. Anesthetic molecules act as a miraculous switch. They basically switch off consciousness. The question is, how does this happen? So you need to find out where they act and how they act. So I'll tell you about this on Thursday, how we feel anesthetics interact, how we believe memory is encoded, and how we believe pathological states, this is pathology, may be involved in it. It's a very good question, but it requires about an hour and a half.
Okay, well, we're out of time. Thanks for a wonderful session. We look forward to Thursday very much. And thank all of you. And if any of you have friends or associates who want to come Thursday, the more the merrier. So, okay, thanks.